So, when it comes to why I'm here with you, I have been an exam prep coach and project management trainer for many years. We're pushing 12, 13 years now. And over the years, I've conducted something like 250 trainings. The training sessions have been on the ASM, like this one, the PMP, PMI ACP, PMI RMP. I've had over 5,000 folks come through my trainings over the years. I've got a pass rate that's about 99%. So those are the certifications that I have. Of course, the one that you're concerned with is that one right there. Am I qualified to do this? Maybe I am with that kind of a pass rate, and I've been doing this course for a while. I actually love this course. This is a great course. I have been doing project management for many years, and I've had project management experience in the business sector, the public sector, and as an entrepreneur. For example, I was a project manager at Compaq and HP, vice president of biz development at a company called LegalNet, executive director of the California Commission on the Bicentennial Celebration of the United States Constitution, California director of the National Center for Constitutional Studies. What's interesting is that even though sound rather varied, all of them had some kind of content development and presenting responsibilities with them. So I've been at this kind of stuff for 35 years plus. And what's interesting is when it comes to a workshop like this where we're seeking a certification, I don't know if you know this or not, but there are studies that are done every year by various organizations that compare what certified project managers make compared to what their uncertified colleagues make. And depending on the year, it ranges between 15 and 20% more if you're certified. Now, that may not be your driving factor to be here and participate in this, but to make more money is a good thing. And I just did a calculation that, of all those that have gone through my workshops and considering that average increase in income, I figure that they collectively make $60 million more per year now than they did before. And I've been with Simplilearn now doing classes for them in these various topics for over 3 years. And Simplilearn, which you may or may not know, is the largest training organization in the world and was recently recognized as one of the top 10 most influential education organizations in the world. So you are in the right spot. If you want to get certified and get ahead in this or another area, Simplilearn is the place to be. And we have been around now for about 6 years. Our journey started relatively small, and you can see that from those more humble beginnings, we now have basically a presence throughout the world. And we offer training and certification prep classes for all of these organizations here. Of these organizations, this is the one that we are focusing on for this workshop, EXIN, and the ASM certification. And we have certification courses in all of these different categories right here. Of course, of these categories, the one that is relevant for us right now is Agile Scrum certifications. But there are others, and kind of when we get into a mode of the study and the prep and the getting ready for a standardized test, sometimes it's a good time to take on more than just one thing. And somebody at Simplilearn came up with this brilliant idea of what they called an all-access online classroom pass, where if you upgrade your tuition, you can have access to over 25 of our certification exam prep courses, 120 instructor-led batches, meaning live batches like this, for 90 days. And so you can fast-track your career at your place, your pace, while you're kind of in the mode of doing this. And so the way it works is you pick which of the certifications that you want, like you're doing for this. You can choose whether you want to do a weekend batch or a weekday batch. If you do a weekday batch, it's going to be a 3-hour session, Monday through Friday. And if you do a weekend batch like this one, it'll be 4-hour sessions on Saturday, Sunday, etc. And then not only do you get access to the 120 instructor-led batches, but you have access to the e-learning content for 6 months. Now, and if you're not happy, we'll give you your money back, and it's just, a way to, kind of leverage your mode that you're in. And I have a number of individuals that have been in other classes that were doing 2 or 3 at the same time. So I'm not sure if that's relevant to you or not, but that is an option. And as soon as this is displayed on my desktop, I can share it, which I just did. So you can see that this is the course overview. And when you're finished with this course, you should be able to, I know it says right here, after completing this lesson, but really what we're talking about is the course here. You should be able to play the role of an effective Scrum Master. You should be able to lead Agile and Scrum transformations, meaning going from Waterfall to Scrum or from Waterfall to some other method in Agile. Be able to guide your teams using the proven and recommended practices of Scrum, describe practices of other Agile methods, and adapt those that are beneficial for your team, that are relevant for your project. And then you should be able to also talk about Scrum in the context of DevOps, as well as linking Scrum to IT service management. So and then of course be ready to pass the exam. So, Scrum, so let me back up. We've talked about traditional project management versus Agile project management. And different kinds of projects lend themselves to being best managed by either Waterfall or by Agile. And Waterfall is the traditional make a big plan up front, get your baselines established, make sure you understand the requirements, and then go get the work done. When you're finished, present it to the customer and do the handoff. And so while you're executing on a Waterfall project, you're looking at your actual results, comparing them to your baselines, and that's how you do it. Agile, which is really a family of methods, is a different approach. It's an evolutionary, incremental approach that fits well with projects where there's a lot of uncertainty about the scope. So the solution to deliver the scope will reveal itself or be discovered in an evolutionary way as the project goes forward. And rather than completing the project overall and then showcasing it for the customer like in Waterfall, or in Waterfall you can chunk it up into big phases and deliver it that way. Agile is different. We do very small increments. And at the end of each increment, we're delivering value to the customer. And we discover how to actually get to the solution that the customer wants. So Waterfall, you've got a stable scope and you don't expect a lot of change. Great. In Agile, there's uncertainty and it's relatively complex. And of all of the Agile methods, Scrum is the most popular of them. About 50% of all Agile projects use Scrum. And then the next most popular one is extreme programming, and that's about 30%. So 80% of all Agile projects are going to be using either Scrum or XP. And even though there's a lot of folks that don't like the idea of doing hybrid projects, those that practice Scrum actually end up using a lot of XP practices as well. So the bottom line is that when it comes to Agile, Scrum is the most used, most proven, and it delivers. It actually works, and it works well. So our focus for this course is going to be broadly on Agile, And I'll even take you through a little bit about XP and a couple other methods that belong to the family of Agile. But we're going to drill down on Scrum. And so when we talk about project life cycles, it will be how to do a project using Scrum. And there are a number of roles for a Scrum project. We're going to cover all of them, but we're going to spend most of our time on Scrum Master, which is one of the roles. And then we're going to talk about how to scale Agile. Agile was originally designed for small projects with small co-located teams, but as things have changed over the years, Agile can be adapted to very large enterprise-sized projects. And so one of our lessons is dedicated to that. And then also, we're going to dedicate one whole lesson to doing a transition from waterfall to Scrum. So this certification is unique in that regard. There are certifications like Certified ScrumMaster. That's not offered by EXIN. It's offered by, I think it's the Scrum Alliance. And there's value to that, but it's one that doesn't require training. You won't be able to sit for the ASM exam until you finish this training. With the CSM, it's kind of an open book thing, a little bit more of a, you go do some training and the test is proctored right there. And there's value in that. I'm not saying there isn't, but the Scrum Master, Certified Scrum Master training and certification doesn't get into transition like this does. There's also another Agile certification, and this one's offered by PMI, so the PMI ACP. And that certification gets much deeper into the family of Agile. And so that course will cover, I think it's like 8 or 9 different Agile methods. Most of the emphasis will be on Scrum because of its popularity, but the course itself is more generic about Agile. And there's value in that, but the ACP doesn't get into the scaling in Agile like this one. So, if you wanted to go get another Agile certification, and this is me, but the one I'd recommend is the PMI ACP. So, kind of back to my career coaching thing. Get your ASM, and then if you want to continue, go get your PMP probably, or Prince 2, depending on your environment and where you think you'll be. And then go get your PMI AC. And once you have that, you are going to be well equipped to run projects, and you'll be very desirable to employers out there. Not that you're not now, but they like to see those letters after your name. And then also in that mix is DevOps and integrating into IT service management. So maybe, some DevOps and some ITIL work would also serve you well. And, I'm not one that particularly thinks standardized testing is that great of a way to measure someone's knowledge and predictable potential in the real world. I'm just not. I've seen people who just really have a hard time passing a standardized test who just crush it in the real world. And kind of vice versa. I see people who are really good at taking tests and then, put them in the real world and they don't do so well. But that said, there's no better way to really present yourself to the world as to what your skill sets and experience is. So while standardized testing may not be the best predictor, it is the best way to demonstrate your pedigree, your history and what you bring to the table. So it's important. And learning how to pass the test and get it done and have those initials that you can put after your name at the bottom of your emails and on your business cards, etc., like I was showing you earlier, probably means 15 to 20% more money, plus it fast tracks your career. So this course here, now I'm down to this bottom box here, this course here is going to accomplish 2 main things in summary. It's going to train you, give you lots of knowledge, and it's also going to prepare you for the ASM certification. The target audience, I think we pretty well saw that when we were introducing each other, each of us to ourselves, and I commented on that. You can see that, those of us that are here in this group, the perfect target audience. And we were all in kind of different places, but yet all relevant for this. So you're at the right spot. Now, when it comes to prerequisites, there are none for this, although if you want to sit for the exams, training is mandatory. EXIN will not let you sit for the ASM course unless you have training. This course meets those training requirements. So at the end of this course, you'll get a certification, a certificate. And what EXIN has you do is actually upload that certificate to demonstrate you have the training, and then you'll have access to taking the course. I am in Utah in the United States. I am in the Salt Lake area. I'm about 30 miles south of Salt Lake, and I had a late night. My niece was moving, and so family got together to help move, and we weren't done until late. I didn't even get home till about midnight, and so right now for me it's 9:13 in the morning, so I had to get up earlier than I wanted. But I'm glad I did. I'm glad that I know you, glad that we're acquainted, and I love the subject matter, and I love assisting folks in, learning this material and advancing in their careers. Absolutely love it. So I may not be good at a lot of things, but I got a lot of experience here, and nothing better than seeing folks like you go through one of the courses that I have a hand in and having success as a result of that. Now, the value of this course goes beyond just getting your initials, and I think we've probably talked about most of this here. We're going to talk about, looking at the top left here, good practices in Agile generally and Scrum specifically, how to actually implement things that you learn, get a lot of knowledge about Scrum. And if you already have some, deepen that knowledge. Give you some guidance on how to deal with transformation projects. And, we'll specifically, I got one slide about criticism that you can get when you're doing a transformation, and have a whole slide and discussion about resistance and how to overcome it. Then, of course, we're going to learn new things, and we're going to derive value, not just from, getting your certificate, but also from the point of view of value for your organization, value for you, value going forward. The course syllabus looks like this. Lesson 1 is what we call the Agile way of thinking. So it's what's Agile. We're going to get into some Agile principles. We're going to cover what's called the Agile Manifesto. And we're going to kind of tease you a bit on continuous improvement, specifically when it comes to an Agile transformation effort. Lesson 2 is about other Agile frameworks. So we'll touch on waterfall again as an approach, and then we'll talk about some other methods that belong to the family of Agile. We'll touch on XP and Lean and Crystal and DSDM A-Turn. Not that you're going to be tested on those, but it will help you as a Scrum Master to recognize that there's this family from which you can draw some information and experience that will actually enhance your ability to be a good Scrum Master. This is the lesson where we're going to deal with DevOps. And, linking Scrum projects with operations so that there's things that are done in parallel rather than doing some, development work and then doing a handoff, doing some more development work and then doing a handoff. Have some things going in parallel is a big thing right now as organizations are trying to improve efficiencies and be more responsive to dynamic marketplaces. So we've got a couple of slides on that you'll find interesting. And then similarly, linking Agile with IT service management and doing some things in parallel there as well is helpful, and understanding that is becoming more and more important as the marketplace for projects and folks like us increases. Now, when we get to lesson 3, this is where we start diving deeper into Scrum. So we're going to talk about a Scrum project lifecycle. We're going to talk about the concept of time boxing and what ceremonies and events in Scrum are time boxed. We're going to actually also talk about individually the ceremonies that are part of Scrum. One of us in the introduction talked about retros. And that was short for retrospectives. And we're going to talk about retrospectives. And when we're finished, you're going to realize that retrospectives are critical to Scrum, and that they are the single most important thing that you will do in Scrum to make sure that you are experiencing effective continuous improvement. And we'll also talk about Scrum artifacts, things like, product backlog, release backlog, sprint backlogs. We'll talk about the definition of done. We'll talk about some information radiators and, things like that. Lesson 4 is about the roles that belong to Scrum. So we're going to talk first about the Scrum Master, but then we're going to touch on the product owner and developer. And then we'll get into some of the best practices of being an effective Scrum Master. Lesson number 5 has to do with sort of doing Scrum. And so we'll talk about user stories and epics, and we'll talk about product roadmaps and how we do estimating, both using points and ideal time. We'll talk about planning poker and affinity estimating as common estimation techniques. And we'll get into communicating the status and progress of a project. And this is where we'll again touch on some information radiators like burn down charts, burn up charts, etc. And then how that allows us to stay in control, if you will, of the project. Make sure we're headed in the direction we want to go. Lesson 6 is the one that I talked about that has to do with scaling Agile. And then the last one, lesson 7, which is about adopting Agile, the transition projects. The test itself has domains that you're tested on, and you might have picked up on this. The scaling of Agile and the transformation projects, transitions. I like those a lot. I actually, when I took the real exam, I got 100% on these areas on the exam. There were a couple of areas that I didn't do great. I did good enough, and that might be how it is for you. We all have different strengths and weaknesses. You saw that we have varying levels of experience and areas of experience, and so there'll be parts of this whole experience that you're golden on. And then there'll be others where, it is a little bit more of a learning process. So, and I'm no different, as I just mentioned. So when it comes to the exam itself, when we created this slide here, we put 120 hours of study as recommended. And we were trying to set the bar high for that. And now we recognize that if you have experience, you're probably not going to need that much. But what also we're discovering is that if you will stick with the materials that we have, and I got some guidance for you, and how to use the materials. After we're finished with this, and this isn't a super long training course, we're going to have 4 sessions, 4 hours each, right? 16 hours. Now, we're going to cram a lot of stuff in there. But, what's interesting is it turns out that we have just really done a great job on what we cover. And this, along with those standard or practice tests, rather, there's a pretty darn good chance that you're not going to need to do a whole lot of other study. I will have you do some things between sessions, and, it's not just being here for the 4 hours, so it's definitely more than that. But if you're willing to do it, and if you're willing to embrace my guidance, I'm going to get you there much faster than if you were to do the more traditional study a ton of stuff, make sure you can lead with knowledge. We're going to kind of focus on the exam part of this as, leading with strategy and not with knowledge. The test itself, case studies, I should mention this. There is something that I need you to download, and I think I already put it in the LMS, and it's the assignment. Did I do that? Let me just double check. LMS. Yeah, it's this right here, team. I don't know if you can see my cursor or not. It's the one that says Assignment Scrum Project. Now, there's nothing to turn in on this, but at the end of each session, I want you to return to this assignment paper, and we have some questions that build on the lessons that we have just done using the same scenarios for the project here. So this is a part of the course, and you'll need to, promise that you have actually done this in order to get your certification. Nothing for you to turn in on that, though, but you do have that homework assignment. So the test itself, as I was mentioning earlier, it's 90 minutes, and I think I said 180. I got confused. So it's an hour and a half, 90 minutes. Probably some of you are like, just saying an hour and a half, and he's saying 180 minutes. Okay, so there you go. I'm awesome at math. There are 40 multiple choice questions, like the samples that you saw, A, B, C, or D. And, when I first embarked on getting my ASAM, and I thought, a 40-question exam, I thought, easy peasy, this isn't going to be a robust certification. And then I got into the prep work, and then I got into the practice exams, and I thought, oh, I get this. ASM is an awesome credential to have, and there might only be 40 questions, but they're not easy. Unless you've been through the workshop and, accepted some of my guidance on how to approach a standardized test, then you'll be golden. Let's see, something over here. Do all the lessons and concepts have equal weight in the test, or are some concepts more important? It's all equally weighted. And your results are in the aggregate. It's not for each of the domains. So while everything's weighted equally, you can do really good in an area like I did, which will help make up for some areas where you're not quite as strong. Good question. And I like that question, team, because you're thinking about the exam, right, and getting it done. So your head's in the right spot. Now, here's also what's interesting is you only need 65% to pass, meaning you got to get 26 out of the 40 questions. And that seems low. I get that it seems low. But, after you've gone through this workshop and you've taken the exam, you'll be like me. You'll think, wow, they really did a great job of crafting this exam and making that credential something of relevance in the marketplace. So that's about the course. If you're new to EXIN, what you may want to do is just at some point in time, just go to EXIN.com and poke around, see what kind of certifications they have there, and then eventually drill down to the ASM one. Sorry about that. You're paying the price for me trying to be a blessing for my niece and her family. It's all good, right? Win-win. Okay, and I noticed the confirmation there, Viraj, that we got your question answered. Okay, so that takes us to the end of lesson 1. Okay, so at the end of this lesson, we should be able to explain how to write a user story in epics, carry out planning at the roadmap, release, and sprint level, express estimates in story points or ideal days and explain the pros and cons, perform agile estimation using planning poker and affinity estimation, make progress visible by using information radiators like burn down charts, burn up charts, Kanban boards, etc., and make use of the information in order to keep track of project work. Okay, so first slide here has to do with user stories and epics. And what I want to do, team, is I want to, before we get into the user stories, I want to go to the whiteboard and I want to just give you a little bit more information that might help us in organizing our discussion that we're about to embark on here. So a word that is not in our slides is themes. Themes are epics and user stories grouped together. You know, similar epics and user stories grouped together for planning purposes. So an epic is big. You would never do an epic a theme in a sprint. It's too big. So it's used for planning purposes. Below that, I would put epics. Epics are low priority, large user stories, meaning that an epic will eventually have to be disaggregated into multiple user stories. The reason it would be low priority is because if an epic was higher up on the product backlog, it would have to be more detailed. That's when you would break it down. So epics are usually going to live at the lower priority levels of a product backlog, and as user stories are completed and the epic rises in priority, it will eventually be broken down into more manageable user stories. So great big low priority user stories. Then we have user stories themselves. User stories are functions or features that the product owner wants to have developed. A user story turns into working software that provides value to the customer. And the product owner is the customer voice. The product owner is the one who would accept or reject completed user stories. And then there are tasks. And a reminder, when we were talking about the sprint planning meeting, we said the sprint planning meeting is got two parts to it. The first part is selecting all of the user stories that are going to be included in the sprint, and then disaggregating each of those user stories into tasks. That's done in the sprint planning meeting, and then those tasks are the things that are actually then done when the work of the sprint begins. User stories can be estimated in story points or ideal days. Most teams favor story points. They might start with ideal days, but they will then usually end up going to story points. Tasks are estimated in ideal time, which is usually hours. Okay, so now back to our slides. So at the top left, a use case could be an example of a user story. So it's something that the user wants to do and how the system should support it. A use case could be select and pay for items in a catalog. Now that could actually be an epic or maybe a theme, because maybe it would get disaggregated into log on screen, catalog, shopping cart, and checkout. But so the use case could either be a standalone user story, or it could actually be a number of user stories that would result from it. Below that requirement, it could be a functional requirement, a technical task, or even a bug fix. So I'm going to go back to the whiteboard, and a product backlog is going to have a lot of user stories that come from the customer, right? Whatever the customer wants done. But the team may know that it has to do some development work in order for the user stories to even be able to work. You know, there's some system level non-functional requirements that need to be done. And so there could be tech user stories. And then, can you see this low? I can't see your chats, but then there could also be defect user stories. There could even be risk user stories. Now, what could happen is that the product owner ranks these in priority. So this one first, then that one, then that one. And the team says, well, the only thing is that we have to do some development work before we can actually do user story 2. And so what we really need to do is insert that before the second priority user story. And so the priority of the user stories in the product backlog, while it might start with just being, you know, simple functional user stories coming from the product owner, it will evolve until it includes some other things that are also considerations when it comes to priorities, because of, you know, successor, predecessor relationships, dependencies, and things like that are considerations. A user story, back to the screen, bottom left now, the user story can use a fictitious user or a persona to help the team or the team and the product owner to get an idea of, okay, who's going to be doing this function? What are they going to need in order to be able to complete the function, et cetera? So you try and come up with an actual, well, a fictitious, but a person who's actually doing it, to kind of get out of the realm of, you know, listing requirements and, you know, specs and things like that, and say, okay, what's the user experience need to look like? Top right, template. A portion of a user story is, let me back up. So a user story card is usually going to contain a brief description of the user story using some kind of a meta-language format, like we're suggesting right here. As a user or persona, I want this feature so that I can. So not unlike our estimating session here. As a frequent traveler, I want to eat grapes so I can be healthier. In the one that we didn't do, the inventory system, as a customer, okay, there's a user. I want to get cash back so I don't have to wait in line at the bank. Okay, here's another user story. As a consumer, I want the shopping cart functionality to easily purchase items online. And maybe that could be customer as well. As an executive, right, as a suit, I want to generate a sales report so I know which departments need to improve their productivity. As a buyer, so you can see I tried to come up with these different roles right here: executive, buyer, sales rep, etc. And that's the format. As a type of user, I want some kind of goal or feature, and so that's some kind of a reason. Below that, connect. connect the dots by writing all of the user stories necessary to uncover the entire use case. So like we were talking about right here, if you want to be able to purchase items online from a catalog, that might be multiple user stories in order to support that use case. And so, of course, we would want to be able to connect the dots and see where all the user stories fit into the overall goal of the project or release. And the stories, excuse me, are grouped to form an epic or higher level story, so epic or theme. Stories can then be split into child stories or tasks, and so that's what we were covering before, right? So you have themes up at the top. That's the biggest grouping, if you will, used primarily for high-level planning purposes. So you have your themes, then you have your epics, which are large user stories, low priority, and they're going to have to be broken down into smaller user stories. Like in the question that we had at the end of the last section where the product owner needed something done and the team said, well, based on the size of this user story, it's going to take 3 sprints to do. Well, a user story has to be small enough to be completed within a single sprint. So a sprint can contain more than one user story, but a user story cannot span sprints. So that feature or function that was in the question was probably more like an epic. It was something that would need to be disaggregated into smaller user stories, or perhaps it was more of a use case that would need more than one user story in order to actually deliver the overall use case. Let's see, as a product supervisor, I want to see an unfinished part list at the end of the day so that I can reallocate work the next day. Great user story description. Well done, Viraj. Did you hear that, team? As a product supervisor, I want to see an unfinished part list at the end of the day so I can reallocate work the next day. That is a well-crafted description of a user story. Now, here are some things that I want you to memorize. You were hoping I was done with the memorization part. So I want you to remember that we have to invest in our user stories. And I was going over to the whiteboard and I didn't change cameras, so let me do that. I recommend figuring out how you memorize best so that you can, well, not if you wanted to. What I recommend is being able to write out all of this stuff on plain white scrap paper in about 14 minutes, because that's the amount of free time you have in the tutorial when you're at the, or when you're taking the test. EXIN does it a little bit different. You maybe won't have a tutorial. The only time you'd have a tutorial is if you were at a center taking a test. EXIN has other options, like you can do a paper-based test where you get a third party, a buddy or somebody who will agree to sort of proctor the test for you, or you can do it on your laptop all by yourself. And they have software that watches you while you're taking the test, and they require you to take the laptop and do like a 360 so that they can verify that you don't have any cheat sheets up on the wall or anything like that. But the point is you got to have this memorized, whether you're going to dump it out onto paper or not. When I took the test, I actually did the paper-based option. And that was because of some time constraints, and it was the quickest way to get me into the test. And so I didn't write out any of the stuff I'd memorized, but I had it memorized, and I had it memorized well enough that I could kind of recall it in my mind's eye. Okay, so we're talking about user stories, and you have to invest in your user stories. You know I like memorizing things by creating these charts that have the first letter of the word or phrase that you're memorizing in a separate column. And then I make up a story, that reminds me that I've got to have INVEST. This one is pretty easy, probably just invest works. So let's go over that. I stands for independent. Independent, meaning that each user story stands on its own. You don't have, when we're doing Scrum, you don't do a user story that won't result in working software. We just talked about the description of user stories, right? So it's a user that needs some kind of functionality for some kind of a reason, and they're all independent. Will they work together? Of course they'll work together if that's a necessity, but if you developed a logon screen, you could demonstrate working software for the login screen. There might be another user story that is, has to do with displaying the catalog and being able to flag or select items that you want to purchase. But there'd be working software for that. Would they work together? Yes, but each user story would complete or result in some kind of working software, and they have to be independent. Negotiable. Negotiable in the way the user story is going to be implemented. The product owner doesn't dictate to the team. The team doesn't say it's only this way and we don't want to hear anything from you. So there are discussions about the size and implementation for each user story. So the product owner can't make it so detailed that there's no room for discussion and the possibility of the team coming up with solutions other than what the product owner was attempting to dictate. V stands for valuable, meaning each user story has to create value for the customer or the end user. E has to be estimable, as in estimatable, except estimatable is not really a word, it's estimable. And S is for small, has to be small enough to be done in a single sprint. If we're doing 2-week sprints, it has to be able to be done in 2 weeks or less. If we're doing 4-week sprints, it could be a larger user story, but it would still have to be done in 4 weeks or less. And then the last one, the T, is testable. Every user story needs to be testable, and it needs to be testable at 2 levels. Remember our triangle? It needs to be testable at the intrinsic quality level, unit tests, etc., and also testable at the extrinsic level, which is the customer point of view, which is acceptance. So every user story has to be testable. Okay, so that's invest, and so let's add that to our list of things to memorize. Invest. And then the next one we have here is the 3 C's of a user story. So the first C, team, is card. So user stories should be able to be written on a 4 by 6 inch index card or some media similar to that. Card. The second C is conversation. The user story card is the item that is used for the team and the product owner to talk and discuss in order to make sure that the product owner and the team are on the same page when it comes to what is actually supposed to be developed and what it's supposed to look like at the end, which leads us to the third one, which is confirmation. Each user story essentially has to have acceptance tests in it itself. So card 4 by 6, conversation, that's the starting point. That's where the team and the product owner discuss, and then eventually there will be acceptance tests included on the user story card in order to be used during the sprint review to assure that it's acceptable, that there's confirmation. Okay, so let's add that to the memorization list. So 3 C's. All right, now I've got an example here of a user story card. So we're looking right here. And if you were to go out on the internet and search user story cards, they would be similar. There would be some differences, of course. But typically what you're going to have is you're going to have a title or a name for the user story. And then there's going to be some kind of unique identifier, like user story 321. Then there will be the description like we just talked about. As a librarian, I want to have the facility of searching a book by different criteria so that I will save time while serving a customer. Then there might be some other descriptive words or links to other information that might be necessary. And then there would be acceptance criteria or tests. Sometimes these get included on the back of the card, but the point is that they are on the card. Then there will be an estimate of size. It could be ideal days or story points. As I mentioned, most teams do story points. That's more likely what you'll be tested on as opposed to ideal days. But, you know, we'll cover both so you understand the differences. There's probably, it's not listed here, but there's probably going to be a value point assignment. This is where the product owner kind of determines in a relative way the value of the stories. Just like we were doing in planning poker, the product owner might say, well, this story is twice as valuable as this other one, comparing them together. And this is what these value points are what's used to prioritize the user stories. That's supposed to be a V, as in value points. And then typically there's also going to be a indication. Sometimes it's just by colors. It could be words that has to do with, you know, where the story came from. Did it come from the customer? That would be considered a functional requirement. If it came from the team, that would be from the technical domain. I'm trying to write where from. You know, it's not me, team, it's the mouse. Clearly, it's hard to do that. That's from, where from. Here it's got customer, tech. You could also have defect. You could maybe have risk. And then there's also going to be an X factor, which would be some kind of word probably like stable, erratic, incomplete, something like that, to so that the team is designating the user story in respect to the amount of uncertainty or risk that's associated with that user story. And because all of that's a part of the story, right? The story is going to be turned into working software. There may need to be some efforts to actually figure out how to actually do that user story. So that's the X factor. Over to the right here on the same chart, we have some comments about if you are using a software package, excuse me, like Trello or Jira or something like that, excuse me, the user story cards will generally be able to contain more information using, you know, dynamic links and things like that. Could even include things like responsible team member, or depending on how you're doing it, you would break the user story down into tasks, and you might have team members assigned to various tasks for the user story. Okay, so that's typically what a user story card is like. Sometimes they're cards, sometimes they're like on sticky notes, and they're put up on a Kanban board if you're using Kanban to track the project. If you have a story that is too large to be completed in a sprint, it's going to have to be subdivided, or we call it disaggregation, into smaller user stories. And there's 3 ways that we're proposing here that you could go about doing that. You could split it based on operational boundaries. For example, as an operator, one needs to manage reservations, which could be split. For example, there could be one portion that is that has to do with making a reservation, another one that has to do with modifying it, and yet another one that has to do with canceling it. So that could be split into, in this construct here, 3 separate user stories. You could also separate based on exceptions or cross-cutting concerns. For example, in the beginning, develop only one main path, like accept repayment for a loan. Then address exceptions, like what if a person overpays? Then come up with a user story that recognizes that and processes a refund, and or gives the option of allocating the overpayment to a future payment or something like that. And then also adds on other concerns like the check access restrictions or record name of operator. So maybe, when you're working on accepting payments or processing refunds, it's going to check on who the operator is or track that, so that if at a later time, who was it that gave this refund here? Well, you could look and see, okay, the operator's name was recorded. Or maybe you put some restrictions so that maybe not everybody is allowed to do a refund. And so you would have levels of users that have different privileges. Okay, and then down at the bottom, split based on data boundaries. For an example, as an accountant, one needs to enter balance sheet information, which could then be split into summary information and separately receivable details, or maybe you could have AP. So you could have different portions of the overall balance sheet activities that need to be done. So enter AR, enter AP, etc. Make sense? So just to kind of prompt you, give you some ideas about what to do in a Scrum project if you have the scenario arise where a user story is being estimated by the team and it won't fit into a sprint. It's too big. Now, when it comes to determining value for user stories, this is primarily owned by the product owner, right? And it always comes back to money, but money, the value can be looked at from different points of view. So new revenue, obviously, getting new customers and having them buy stuff. Well, below that, there's another consideration, incremental revenue. So somebody's in the process of placing an order, maybe there are some premium features that could be add-ons at that point in time, or maybe added later on. So you have an existing customer who actually buys more of or enhanced parts of the existing thing they already purchased or are in the process of purchasing. Retained value. So this is, retaining customers so that they don't go to a competitor. And then the bottom one is operational efficiency. How could things be done to speed up the process of whatever it is so that the cost of delivering the product is reduced. So this then leads us to a discussion about priorities, recognizing that there are some priority concerns that come from both the customer domain as well as the technical domain. And there are some prioritization models. If we look right here, there is value-based prioritization, and the hierarchy of that would be high value, followed by high risk, followed by high value, and then low risk, followed by low value, and then low risk. So, you know, we might have written this a little bit differently, but that's value-based prioritization. And this is primarily the product owner with maybe some input from the team, just simply deciding what he or she wants done most, listening to the team say, well, you know, there's some, you know, greater risks with this user story than that. And so you'd probably want to persuade the product owner to take care of high-risk stuff first, because that would have an impact on the future things that need to be done. There's the Kano model, which looks at each of the user stories and classifies them as being mandatory, linear, or exciters. And the mandatory items are those user stories that are musts. And they'll never move the customer or the end user beyond neutral. It's if they're not there, it creates dissatisfaction. If the product owner and the team has done a good job in identifying what are the mandatory or threshold items, you would see that it just gets it to neutral. That's what's expected for the product. Linear items, user stories, are those user stories that as they are implemented progressively throughout the project and added to the feature set, it will linear increase customer satisfaction. And it can be, you know, in their absence, dissatisfaction, all the way up to high implementation, creating a great deal of satisfaction for the customer. And then the third category is exciters and delighters. And those are features or functions. Those are user stories that are not mandatory. And the absence of them will never result in satisfaction going below neutral. But by adding them, you could create excitement and delight for the customer. These would typically be things that are features that would be included in a premium version of the product, or maybe add-ons that are promoted, you know, at the point of sale. You know, have you thought about this because it'll really help you, or whatever. So that's the Kano model. And then there's Uyghur's relative weighting method. And this is all using numbers. So each feature is given a value for its benefit, and its penalty, given a value for penalty, meaning what's the pain if that feature or function is not included. And then there is the cost side and the risk side. And then those are all calculated together, and that results in, a ranking or a hierarchy, which gives you the priority for the user stories. We also talked about Moscow, didn't we? Did we talk about Moscow? Moscow is another prioritization model. Must, could, I said that differently. Must, should, could, won't. Moscow, M-S-C-W. Must, should, could, won't. And we talked about that one. Thank you for that confirmation. Does it seem like a long time ago, or is it just me? I know it was just last weekend, but it's like last year. Okay, so now let's talk about velocity. Priyanka, that is exactly right. So velocity is the capacity of the team to complete work in a single iteration. So the team has estimated the user stories for size or ideal days, and the sprints are going to be 3 weeks in duration. Obviously, not all user stories can be completed in a single sprint and be done with the project. Well, I guess maybe I shouldn't say obviously. When I'm saying that, I'm thinking, well, maybe you had a very small, short duration project, so you could. But the point is that it's the team's capacity to complete work in a given sprint. And it is an observation. It's not a prediction. So if we're working on sprint 5 and we're working on determining what our velocity is, then it would be the average of the previous 4 sprints. If there were any outliers, you would disregard those. And so it's an observation. If we look over to question or box number 2 here, velocity is used to deal with determining how many user stories we are going to include in a given sprint, and also how many sprints are we going to need to create a release or a set of user stories. And here's an example. In box number 3, a team completed 5 user stories that were sized 5, 3, 8, 13, and 2. 2 user stories, each sized 5, were left half complete. What is the velocity of the team? And the answer is either going to be 31 or 36. 31 is the sum of the completed user stories. If you were 36, you were claiming half of the 2 that were 5. So that would be a total of 10. So you claim half of it, which would be 5, would take you to 36. But it's not going to be 36 because the only thing that counts towards progress is working software. So even if the team had finished 9 out of 10 story points for a user story, meaning it's almost done, and then the sprint ends, that doesn't get counted towards velocity. And you don't mess around with velocity. You can mess around with your estimating, and you can mess around with what user stories are going to be completed in a sprint, but you don't. The velocity is not variable. It is what it is based on past performance. When it comes to levels of planning, we have what's called the planning onion. And let me walk you through this here. Up at the broadest area is the vision level. So the vision level, that's the suits, right? They're the ones that have the strategy and objectives for the company and where it's going. And so they have that overall big vision for the company, which is likely going to include products. And each product should have a roadmap. My example of that website that I'm working on has 3 versions which make up the product roadmap. Version 1 is the free site, version 2 is the membership site, and version 3 is the pay referral commissions version of the site. And the product roadmap is then supported by releases. So for my project, I have 3 releases. So all of the user stories needed for the free version are in release 1. All of the additional user stories that are needed for the paid version, the subscriber version, and then also for version 3, those are all releases, 3 releases. And then for each sprint, we will be pulling user stories from the release that we're working on. A release is likely going to take multiple sprints. And then the sprints are populated by the individual user stories, which are then disaggregated into tasks. And we do the daily Scrum, which is the daily level of planning and coordination. So we call that the planning onion. We already kind of talked about the release and roadmap concept here. So let's just review this quickly. Prioritize high-level epics and determine goals and releases. So we'll use epics and themes in order to group things together. You know, what should be included in what's released. So what are the goals for the releases? Then the first bullet point, establish goals of release based on market demand, regulatory needs, or customer expectations. For each release, you want to estimate the target stories. Repeat until the target stories are assigned an iteration length. it's blending some things here. Be able to estimate velocity and then assign stories to the sprints. So we keep estimating the user stories and we keep organizing that until we can do that. We can come up with an iteration length, a sprint length, and then figure out what our velocity for each sprint is, and then assign stories to the sprints. The next bullet down, iterate until the user stories and release date meets conditions of satisfaction. So that's definition of done or acceptance for the release. And try not to pack too much into a release backlog. So just like you would not want to pack too many user stories into a sprint. You want to have the timelines appropriate and what are included in the events make sense. Okay, so here's a bit more about release planning on this slide here. You've got the product backlog here on the left, and then we might come up with a release plan, which could be flipped and could be looked at horizontally. And you probably plan about 3 releases in advance, or at least you're doing more of the detailed planning on that. Because things are going to emerge when we do, sprint 1 that's going to help in sprint 2, and things that happen in sprints 1 and 2 that are going to help release 3, and then you've got, your subsequent releases where we're just doing very high-level planning. It's called rolling wave planning, where we do detailed planning for things in the future in tandem with doing high-level planning for things in the future. Did I say that right? Detailed planning for things in the near term in tandem with high-level planning for things in the future. And we talked about deciding as late as possible, I believe, meaning that it's better to actually plan the later releases for purposes of making sure we have more information, the most information available. Okay, so estimation. Let's start at the top left. The principles behind estimation. Understand the cone of uncertainty, which is an estimate or best guess to begin with and then progressively becomes more accurate. In fact, let's just take a break and look at the cone of uncertainty. So at the very beginning of a project, there's going to be a high level of uncertainty. If I were to draw this chart, I would make it a little bit more like this. So clearly, you're going to de-risk the project as early as you can, and then eventually all risk disappears when the project is done. Risk is uncertainty. Okay, below that, the only estimate that matters is the one given by the team. Supported by this comment here, nothing is impossible for the one who doesn't have to do it. So the product owner is like, team, come on, you can do this. The team's like, no, we know what our velocity is. No, the product owner says, I'm telling you, there's no way that can't be done. I know you can do it. I trust you. I believe in you. But the product owner doesn't have to do the work. Okay, top right, overestimation and underestimation is always going to be an issue that we deal with. It's more likely that we will underestimate than overestimate. And by looking at our velocity from iteration or sprint to sprint, there could be some information that is showing us that we're underestimating, for example, meaning we're thinking the user stories are smaller than they are and that we can get, a certain number done in a sprint and then there's a fail. Well, that would mean then that would be discussed during the retrospective, and then we would do something different going forward, which might include doing some re-estimating. Scrum estimating is not necessarily more difficult. However, Scrum exposes bad estimates sooner, which is a good thing. When we were doing our planning poker, you could see that the first time as a team, we didn't know each other. We didn't know everybody's thoughts and concerns. And those kinds of things, get shared and absorbed as a project goes on. And so there's a higher awareness of that. So what we would say is that using estimation techniques, Scrum estimation techniques, might be more inaccurate at the beginning of a project, but they will quickly become very accurate as the project advances forward. Let's see, there's a question here. Can velocity be increased over a period of time for the project? Yes, it can. Now, it's not that it will increase if the team is learning how to work together better and better. You would expect that, if I can just use my mouse here, if we were tracking velocity, so this would be points completed over here. Let me just do PTS for points. And down here is time. And we go from sprint to sprint, right? You would expect that maybe, the first couple of sprints, the team would be learning how to work together, and there would be a steep curve, and then it would kind of flatten out and maybe have, a slow rise going forward as the team emerges as a high-performing team. They get better at their cross-functional behavior. Somebody's sick, the team just keeps chugging along. Other things, oh, sorry. There, I had bumped a thing on my screen there. So the team, learns how to work better together, and their estimates become more accurate, etc. And you would expect a high-performing team to have a result like this for velocity, where there's quick improvement, and then it kind of stabilizes and then begins to tick upwards. Okay, we talked about the cone of uncertainty. Let's talk about ideal time. When we do estimating for user stories, we do it in ideal days. When we do estimating for tasks, we do it in ideal time, which means hours. I think that's on the whiteboard, or it was on the whiteboard. Oh, it was on it. So ideal time is the amount of time it takes to complete a piece of work. But that's based on the notion that the team member or members are available to do just the work with no distractions or anything at all. So assuming that Priyanka could sit down at a keyboard and code for 8 hours without taking a break for lunch, no phone calls, no discussions, no meetings of any kind, just work 8 hours, how much could be done in that 8 hours by Priyanka? That's what ideal time is. But the thing of it is that there is no such thing as somebody being able to spend every minute of every day only doing work. There will be distractions. So it has to be converted into elapsed time. Now, we don't convert it to elapsed time at the user story level, but we do convert it to elapsed time when we are dealing at the task level. And what that looks like is, for each team member, you're going to have to do it separately, because some team members have more distractions than others. Some might have other duties that pull them away. Whatever the case may be, you determine how much time in a given day a team member is available to do work. So say it's 5 hours out of 8 for one. Maybe it's 6 hours out of 8 for another. Maybe it's 4 out of 8, but you figure out what it is, and then you take the average, and that average availability is used then to convert ideal time into elapsed time. I should have circled this box here because we talked about this as well. And then I already mentioned this here, only considers actual work time, not the distractions. So that's the concept of ideal time. When it comes to story points, it's different than that. They are a measure of size relative to each other. So we were doing planning poker this morning where we were looking at grapes versus apples, and then we were looking at oranges and what else do we have? Watermelons and coconuts. And we weren't trying to figure out how much time it would take to eat grapes as opposed to how much time it would take to eat a coconut. It's clear that it's going to take longer to eat a coconut because there's more effort involved. So we have a sense that it's going to take more time. But comparing the coconut to our baseline of 2, right, we came up with a baseline of 2 for the smallest user story. We compare eating coconuts to that baseline and we say, okay, you know what, it's going to take more effort to eat the coconut than it is to eat grapes or apples. So you can do it like we did. You can also triangulate. For example, when we did our planning project this morning, or this morning for me rather, at the beginning. Oh, that's not it. That is the daily stand-up. Here it is. If I had said, team, I want you to pick a small user story, a medium user story, and a large user story. And then we would then compare other stories to those 3, and so we would kind of triangulate on it. Let's say that we did, 2 was small. I'm sorry, I'm saying that wrong. Grapes was small, apples were medium, and coconuts were large. Well, if we then looked at orange and we said, well, orange is smaller than apples but bigger than grapes. So we would know this would fit in between grapes and apples. And so let's say, we had apples at 5 and grapes at 2, then we would say an orange is probably going to be 3. And the values, now I used, in our example, the modified Fibonacci series. What we do in Scrum and Agile, if we're using story points, we're going to use a nonlinear scale for the values. So down at the bottom here, there's the modified Fibonacci sequence. The way the Fibonacci sequence works, by the way, it's the value is the sum of the 2 on the right. So let me break this right here because this is a modified Fibonacci. So 13 is 5 plus 8. 8 is 3 plus 5. 5 is 2 plus 3, and 3 is 1 plus 2. If we were doing the real Fibonacci series, this wouldn't be 20. It would be 13 plus 8, which would be 21. I don't know why some use modified Fibonacci and others not, but that's just kind of a common thing to do. If you're doing planning poker, you give everybody 7 cards, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, and 20. Another nonlinear scale is doubling, 1, 2, 4, 8, 16. You typically don't go too far to the left with the values because that either means that you're being too granular or you've got stories that are probably too big and they need to be disaggregated. Now, somebody just chatted here. Should some buffer time be included in the actual estimates? Let me answer that question first by going back to ideal time, and then I'm going to come back to story points and answer the question. When we're estimating in ideal time, we don't add a special amount of time that we would call a buffer. We just allow for the distractions and the interruptions, which could look like a buffer, right? You're saying, Priyanka, if based on your duties in the organization and our workday of 8 hours, you're typically available to be doing your project work 5 out of those 8 hours. So when we are converting ideal time to elapsed time, we will be building in extra time based on distractions and interruptions. We would not call it a buffer, but that's essentially what we're doing. Now, when it comes to user stories that we're using story points, it is different. The points are for the entire amount of the work. And why might we need to have some extra time for a user story? Well, it's likely going to be driven by uncertainty. There might be other things that impact it, but that's the main thing. Sorry, team. So when the team is estimating the size of the user story, they will be including in their discussion and estimates any extra time or buffer time that would be needed for that user story to be completed. So do we accommodate uncertainty when we're using story points? Yes, we're looking at the X factor, and if we've got an unstable user story, then we're probably going to say, this is going to be a bigger user story than one that's similar but has a much lesser level of uncertainty. So that's the story points. Let's compare the two. Ideal time uses things like hours and days, which is easier to explain outside the team, right? The suits like things in days and hours. Everybody's estimate may be different, not a bad thing. It's easier to do at the beginning because we're oriented to think about time. And it does kind of shine a light on wasted time. Story points are harder to explain outside the team. The suit says, well, how long is it going to take to do user story 301? And our answer is, well, that's a 10 user story point user story. And the suit's saying, what does that mean? Tell me how long it's going to take. So the suits have to be converted to story points. Now, here's the thing. It's a lot easier to get consensus when we're estimating in story points. And once we get good at it, it's going to be much faster. We have to remember it's not comparable across teams. So, a team working together will have its own kind of system for sizing the stories, and another team that might even be working on the same project will have a whole different scheme. And so if the velocity of one team is 25 and the velocity of another is 50, it doesn't mean that the team with the velocity of 50 is able to do more work than the teams whose velocity is 25. And we did, when we got our day going, we started with a planning poker exercise. And so, we used all of the team members. So we selected the team. The product owner was there to answer any questions. The team discussed each of the story cards and then decided what their vote was going to be. And then everybody voted at once. If there were outliers, they were discussed. And the reasons for that, those variances, those outliers, were then part of the discussion. And then we did another round of voting. And we would keep doing that until we had our estimates converge or we reached consensus on them. Okay, so advantages of planning poker: it's fun, it's quick, it gets the whole team involved, the team understands a little bit about all of the stories, everybody contributes his or her expertise, and the discussion during the estimation provides clarity in the direction approach and even a bit of design. If we were in the same room team and we were doing a planning poker activity like we did at the beginning of our day together, we would be able to, model it a little bit better. Or if we tried to unmute everybody, but you could hear the background noise. I've tried doing it, it doesn't really work. But you get the idea that if the team's discussing and things like that, you would actually get to the point where your estimates would converge and the team would say, okay, this user story size is, whatever it is. Okay, so we need to wrap things up for the day. So we are ending right here. And that means tomorrow when we get together, we're going to be doing slide 20, or starting with that, which is affinity estimating. And let's see, affinity estimating, we go through that. We're going to talk about tracking progress using information radiators. And then we're going to talk about what we do when we find variances between the plan and the actual results, and then we'll have our quiz. So we're almost finished. I think we're good on time. And I'm going to just get us right back to where we're leaving off, which is right here. And I'm going to put that away. And let me open it up, team, if there are any questions about anything. While you're doing that, I'm going to pull up our wrap-up slides here. So the first part of that, if you happen to remember, is questions and answers. And that can be about anything. While you're contemplating whether or not you're going to ask questions, let me take us to the second part here, which is what to do between now and tomorrow. And there were some questions about the assignment. There we go. So I see that came up as a reminder for me. Let me see if I can pull that up here. Okay, so let's start at the bottom. We have some questions about this assignment that have to do with what we covered in lesson 1, a separate question or two based on what we learned in lesson number 2. Did I say that wrong? Lesson number 1, lesson number 2. So you can see that we got through 3, we finished 4. So the question then, based on the scenario here, the Smart Weather project itself, and then Big Bucks Cafe and La Viva Life Insurance who want to use the Smart Weather software. So they are relevant to our discussions here about the overall Smart Weather project. So just between now and tomorrow, just carve out some time, reread the assignment, and ask yourself, what would a cross-functional team for this project look like? So you're looking at the user stories, what needs to be done, the fact that they're likely going to, end users are going to likely be at Big Bucks Cafe and at La Viva Life Insurance. And then if you didn't get the others done, then we just have questions for lessons 1, 2, and 3 as well, and you could backfill on that. So let's see, Sandeep and Ritesh, I think you had questions on the assignment. Did that help? Ritesh is asking, can we please get this recording in the next 10 to 12 hours? I know that that's usually what happens. I don't control that. I have no ability to get you the recording one way or the other. So we're going to have to trust the host to do that. No, I was not having a question on the assignment. Oh, okay. So there was another one. So Sandeep, are we good on the assignments? The assignment part, rather? Oh, I was thinking if we could go into the detail. No, it's and there's a reason for it. I want you to struggle with it. And there's no really right answers or wrong answers. I just want you to get into it on your own when I'm not here, the team's not there, so that you can be thinking through it. So if you were looking for, more like a wrap-up quiz experience, we're not going to do that. So you're pretty much on your own. And Sandeep, you are up to that task. You can do that. So there's the assignment, question 4, because we finished lesson 4, and then there is, 1, 2, and 3 if you didn't do those. I want you to go back and review all the pages in the ebook. Nothing new there. That's your chasing the knowledge, reinforcing it. Go back and retake all of the quizzes, and that's reinforcing the strategy. And then last but not least, work on your memorization items. When we get to the point where I give you some guidance tomorrow about what to do between the end of the workshop and when you actually schedule your exam, one of the things is going to be have those items memorized there. Okay, team, so that is, did I get that there? So there's the memorization items so far. And I think I've got another one. I don't know if I have two more. I might just have one more. We will find out. But get those memorized. Remember, there's Simply Talk, where you can download the tools that we uploaded there. You can converse with one another on the team as well as others. And then if you need to do a support ticket, you can always do that by clicking on a link at the bottom of the page. And then when we leave the session, we are, of course, going to do your favorite thing, which is pop up that that eval, that survey. And I know it just takes a couple of minutes, so we make fun of it. We promote it hard because it really does help us. And so, you know, set your disbelief aside and trust us that on our end, it's important for us. The last question, which has to do with whether you would consider recommending us to a friend or a colleague, you got to select 9 or 10 if that's the case. Everything else, you're either a distractor or you're passive or something. I have some kind of rankings on these. And so, team, that takes us to the end of today. Thank you for your participation and your questions. I think this has been a very productive session. And tomorrow we will wrap everything up. We'll finish up lesson 5, and then we'll do 6 and 7. 6 and 7 are fun. They're not very complicated. They can go relatively fast. Lesson 6 is going to be on scaling Agile, where we talk about SAFe. And lesson 7 is about adopting Agile or adopting Scrum. And that's a fun one, too. So we will get it done, and then we will wrap up tomorrow with me giving you some guidance on exactly what I want you to do between the end of the workshop and when you schedule your exam. Nothing mysterious, doesn't even take very long, but it is very specific. So with that, team, thank you again, and I'm going to go ahead and chat our host saying that we are ending the session. And I will just put the participants are eager to get the recording as soon as possible. Okay, so thank you, team,